emerging cannabis legal markets. And to lead us in this, the founder and CEO for the Hyde Advisory and Investments Incorporated, the one and only David Hyde. Thank you.
Well, what an amazing time to be in the cannabis industry. The global cannabis sector is finally showing signs of accelerating growth after many years of slow, what we might call grinding progress. I see a few grinders out in the audience today. I'm one too. Partial legalization in Germany, developments in the United States, progress in key European and global jurisdictions on medical and rec pilots, and market growth in countries like Australia, Germany, Israel, followed by UK, Poland, Brazil, and more, are the catalysts for this newfound and long-awaited momentum. We're on the precipice, it seems to me, of something big. Now more than ever, the topic of emerging cannabis markets is a really hot commodity. But what is an emerging market? What lessons can be learned from the growth of other more mature markets? What are some of the key emerging markets? We brought together a diverse group of leading minds from different parts of the cannabis sector globally to discuss our topic today. I'm David Hyde, CEO of Hyde Advisory and Investments. HAI is a boutique Canadian-based advisory firm brokering M&A and strategic investment deals across the global cannabis space, successfully closing 12 deals in 2023. Rob Perot, to my left, is a respected advocate and thought leader within the indigenous cannabis industry, with extensive experience navigating both regulatory challenges and market opportunities. He represents organizations working towards the international expansion and empowerment of indigenous-led cannabis enterprises. Next to him is Kohei Yamada. Kohei is the founder and CEO of Kiseki Group, the first Japanese vertically integrated medical cannabis company. Kohei's subsidiary company, Kiseki Plant Factory Thailand, has made significant strides in cultivating pharmaceutical-grade medical cannabis in Bangkok, Thailand. Next to him, Zach George is the CEO of Canadian publicly listed license producer SNDL. SNDL is one of Canada's premier vertically integrated cannabis enterprises. Zach is a seasoned executive and entrepreneur with a diverse 20-year investment and executive leadership background. Next to him, Patty Holmes has over 15 years' experience in the pharmaceutical industry with a particular focus on medicinal cannabis. She co-founded one of Australia's first publicly listed medicinal cannabis companies and is now working as a consultant in the novel therapeutic space. Patty is also the executive officer of the Medicinal Cannabis Industry Association, where she plays an integral role in supporting and advocating for the industry. So that's our crew for today. So if everyone's buckled in, let's go for a ride on emerging markets. I'm going to start, if I can, Patty, at the end with yourself. I'm going to put this question to you about the market in Australia. Australia was picked as one of the fastest growing medical cannabis markets in 2023. Why did it grow so fast, in your opinion, and what are the implications for other emerging cannabis markets?
I think it was really interesting that Australia was selected as one of the fastest growing markets because it's so hard to get transparent data on actually what is happening in the market. So that's very interesting. I think one of the reasons that Australia has been so successful is that we have a very good reputation for drug development and pharmaceutical industry experience, and it's recognized with all the other main regulators in the US and the EU. So there's quite a few mutual recognition programs that we've been able to tap into. And I also think because we do so much drug discovery and development, that when our regulator, the TGA, went to establish the prescribing pathways and the product access pathways, they were very clever in that we already had a special access scheme for unregistered medicine, but we didn't have the issue where in so many other countries that GPs weren't able to prescribe. So they didn't limit, as long as the person was medically registered, be the person a GP or a specialist, they were both able to prescribe medicinal cannabis, and they also weren't specific about the indications that you could prescribe for. So as long as the doctor could clinically justify the indication, our regulator was happy with that. And then with the product access pathways, I mean, Australia is very far from the rest of the world, and so I think the way that when it was first regulated, there was obviously no industry in Australia, so they made import pathways very not easily navigated, but there was a pathway, there was an established pathway, and it was well defined. So I think the combination of having product accessible and prescribers willing to prescribe really helped us with the understanding of our regulator.
That's great, Patty. Thanks very much. And really, I think, highlights really why Australia has become one of the medical cannabis powerhouses in terms of its growth and some of the key facets there. Zach, turning to you, as the first G20 nation to legalize recreational cannabis, Canada is a great case study for emerging markets. In Canada, there have been challenges related to product supply, oversupply, retail saturation, regulatory challenges, and so forth. What should other emerging markets consider in developing long-term sustainability in a nascent market?
Thanks, David. So you can come at this from a couple angles. Certainly, there's a lot to learn from in terms of the Canadian case study. First and foremost, when you compare it to one of the larger and more mature markets in the US, Canada is an example of what can occur when you have a national market for flower. So there are some signs and indications at the physical plant level and in terms of costs and the commodity risk that is inherent in the space that will certainly rear its head as we get to interstate commerce across the U.S. Sometime in the future. The other factors that are very relevant to Europe, I think that the rampant over-licensing, which drove material oversupply in Canada, and the lack of enforcement, believe it or not, which has put the government in a position where they are the largest creditor to the industry in Canada, is a real problem. In fact, the current state of arrears when it comes to excise tax in Canada has become so large that it's actually larger than my estimate of what the wholesale market would represent in Germany for the entire year this year. So seriously problematic. Canadian LPs and participants in this industry have gone through a lot of trauma in the last 5 years, which impacts memory. But to put a positive spin on it as well, what you're seeing now is that like any commodity market, you're seeing branded product mean much less to the consumer at retail. We manage a portfolio of about 190 retail doors across Canada. So we can observe last year alone over 10 million consumer transactions, and we see an extreme willingness to switch. So brand awareness is still coming in our market. We have biomass trading both domestically and internationally below the marginal cost of production. So in many ways, the pain that Canada has experienced is accruing to the benefit of European markets like Germany that are accessing that biomass and flower at quite reasonable prices in some cases. I was speaking with an operator yesterday who surprisingly told me that they had paid more for a lot of Spanish origin outdoor grown flower than they had a lot of higher quality indoor grown in Canada, just to put things in perspective.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I think one of the threads that's starting to emerge already with our panelists' responses is the importance of data. So we'll definitely, I think you'll see that as a thread that comes through more and more as we go through the panel discussions here today. Moving to something totally different, another part of the world, in fact, Kohei. The East and Southeast Asian markets, such as Thailand, Japan, Malaysia, are making significant strides with their medical cannabis laws. Thailand has garnered much attention recently and has been discussed earlier today in some of these panels as an emerging market with what we might call tricky and evolving regulations. if there are indeed regulations that could be tricky and evolving. Can you demystify Thailand's cannabis regulations and market for the audience?
Okay, thank you, David. Medical cannabis has been illegal in Thailand since 2018, and decriminalization in 2022 took things a step further, making it no longer a crime to grow and trade marijuana and hemp products. So currently, there are more than 5,000 dispensaries all over the Thailand. However, a new government is planning to ban the recreational cannabis. So, under the new coming regulations, growers and dispensaries will need to comply with GSCP and transform from dispensaries into clinics where cannabis can only be prescribed by licensed doctors, with currently anybody can sell cannabis products to customers. I expect further legislation that will both safeguard and foster the growth of the medical cannabis industry in Thailand to deliver the safe and quality cannabis products to the patients. Yeah.
Excellent, Kohei. Thanks very much. And we're going to come on to the Japanese market a little bit later, which is another very interesting market. But just coming to Rob to kind of finish the first round of questions for the panelists. Rob comes at it from a little bit of a different outlook, of course. Rob, what are the biggest challenges indigenous-led cannabis companies have in expanding to international markets? And how can representative organizations like the one you represent support them?
Yeah, first, thanks for being here. I'm grateful to be here. It's a loaded question. I think there's a little context that has to be provided. We're here as ICIA, the Indigenous Cannabis Industry Association, on behalf of tribes that have signed resolution of support for our trade association to activate tribes in the cannabis and hemp industry. There's 574 independent sovereign nations in the U.S. right now, and there's indigenous nations across the world. Safety is paramount for our communities, testing, regulatory bodies. We can do all those things within the jurisdictions of our own governments. So there's a massive opportunity for tribes, and they're activating. There's approximately 100 operating right now in the U.S. First Nations we know are operating as well. And there's sovereign markets and there's open markets. So there's a lot of complexity to the market and also a lot of opportunity. And for us on the world stage, it's about expressing that we're open for business, that we are looking for partners, and really advocates as well to elevate that this plant really is a medicine. And we have our own sort of safety crisis happening by not moving this legislation forward on a world stage.
That's great, Rob. Thanks very much. And I think it's just so intriguing to think about the indigenous groups and their involvement in the industry. I know in Canada, it took some time to develop, but it has developed and it is developing quite well now. But you think about other countries, there might not be an indigenous population, but you think about other markets with the Rastafari, for example, in Jamaica or Barbados, where there are religious or cultural reasons why different groups have accessed cannabis in different ways. And there's a lot of historical context to this as well. So I think in most markets, emerging markets, you'll have interest groups or other groups that need to be thought about and navigated, not to mention, of course, the legacy markets that occur in each of the jurisdictions. Back across to you, Patty, again, other side of the world here for a few minutes. How is the Australian government assisting Australian cannabis companies, broadly speaking, but more specifically in evaluating potential export markets from Australia?
The government's been very proactive in assisting companies in the cannabis space. A great example is we have a booth here. The MCIA has a booth here at ICBC. This is our third year, and we partner with Global Victoria, which is one of our state governments. And so they fund the booth and the everything that's required for the booth. And we bring a delegation every year of Australian companies so that they can interact with their contemporaries around the world to build those business pathways. The other thing that the different departments, like we do a lot with the Department of Health, but also the Department of Agriculture, because this is a plant at the end of the day. And the Department of Agriculture has actually given us a $250,000 grant for the MCIA to explore export opportunities and export markets for Australian companies. So what that means is that our scope of work is to go around and see what are the short, medium, and long-term prospects for our medicinal cannabis products in Australia to go to markets overseas. And because we're only a medicinal market, we can only export to countries that have federally legal medical cannabis markets. So we cannot go, none of our product can be diverted to adult use or rec markets. So the Department of Agriculture has been very supportive in assisting us to find markets for the Australian manufacturers of products.
And that's great insights, Paddy. And I mean, it kind of comes back to the idea of how plugged in is the government? How supportive is the government in emerging markets? Are there funding allocations allowed, whether it be research, et cetera, that
actually,
that new
on that topic, in Australia, we have a very good tax R&D incentive for any medical clinical development work that happens in Australia. There's a 48% tax rebate. So for every dollar spent, you get 48 cents back on the dollar. So there are many of the pharmaceutical companies that use Australia for their contract research organizations.
Great intel, Paddy. Thank you very much for that. Zach, coming to you, many Canadian companies are exploring entrance into the United States market. What emerging opportunities are you looking at in the States, and do you think they'll face similar challenges as seen in Canada? And a second part to this question, just to keep it tricky for you, is SNDL pursuing opportunities in the United States or additional global markets?
Yeah, I think in our case, we've gone through such a dramatic transformation in the last 3 years that people aren't aware of our current business model. So in terms of Canadian participants, I think there's the narrative and what's being spoken about versus reality. So there are very few Canadian participants that have the wherewithal or the capital resources to successfully enter the market. We've seen a number of US brands be brought up and experience varying levels of success in Canada. We may one day see the reverse happen. There's always the possibility that a Tim Hortons or other classic Canadian brand could do well internationally. In our case, we made a decision early on that as a NASDAQ listed company that's prohibited from engaging in plant touching activities in the US, that we would gain exposure through credit. So we deployed over $500 million CAD into a series of secured credit positions in the US against top MSOs. And a few of those, as they've experienced financial woes, are being restructured, and we will end up as either supermajority or 100% owners of those businesses down the road.
Great insight, Zach. Thanks very much for that. Kohei, we'll come to you on Japan. As I mentioned earlier, Japan is currently active on the medical cannabis regulatory front. Can you provide an update on the laws and future medicinal market in Japan?
Thank you, David. In December 23, Japan passed a landmark cannabis reform bill, which is expected to be fully implemented by the end of 2024. The new regulations are very clear. Only prescribed medicines like Epidiolex that have been approved by the Japanese FDA are legal. While smoking, cannabis remains illegal even for medical use. So I think this legalization is still the good opportunity for the Japanese people to know the medical benefit and efficacy of cannabis, while most of the Japanese people think cannabis is still just drug, since we have been brainwashed by propaganda after World War II. So this represents a significant opportunity for biotech companies specializing in the cannabinoid medicine, particularly those are already in phase 2 or phase 3 of clinical trials and already approved by foreign FDAs in the Western world. This is crucial because development of new medicines from scratch can often take more than 10 to 15 years. This advantage is especially remarkable considering the Japanese FDA's policy of requiring approval even for drugs that have already been approved by foreign FDAs. Introducing cannabinoid medicine that are already an advantage stage has the potential to speed the introduction and use of cannabinoid-based medicine to patients in Japan. This approach can provide quick access to effective treatments, leveraging this groundwork laid by extensive research and testing already completed in the other countries. I'm very keen to develop cannabinoid medicine in partnership with Western companies, particularly orphan drugs for epilepsy, Dravet syndrome, and Parkinson's disease, which doesn't have effective treatment so far.
Great, Kohei. Thanks very much. And that Japanese market's pretty intriguing. And again, though, we get the idea that different markets are going to take different shapes. The Japanese market will be a pharmaceutically driven market in a similar vein, let's say, to New Zealand or to UK to a degree. Would that be correct?
Yeah, right. Japan will be one of the biggest cannabinoid medicine market if Japanese people wants to take any cannabinoid substances for medical use. There's only option, the pharmaceutical medicines. Yeah.
Right.
So very clear.
For sure. And then you look at other markets, and they're more hybrid markets. You might even call them pre-rec markets if you wanted to coin, a term for them. So I think when you're looking at emerging markets and deciding as a business where you want to go, or how you want to partner up, or where your product mix today and tomorrow may fit, looking at the orientation of the regulatory scheme in those markets is really, really critical. And obviously, Japan will be an intriguing market with a pharmaceutical bent, if you will. Rob, coming across to yourself, how does tribal sovereignty and autonomy uniquely position indigenous cannabis businesses in navigating the complex legal landscape of the cannabis industry, especially concerning global trade?
Yeah, there's just a lot, and the U.S. is, it's a shit show. As we're all collecting data here. Data points are what we need in Indian country to move policy within our own reservation boundaries. These are 574 sovereign nations, so they're independent and they have their own ideals. They have their own geographic locations. So kind of starting there and making sure that the house is in order before you're moving in another direction. So I think on this world stage, as why we're here, there's traditional plant medicine rights that our communities have innately since time immemorial. And I think as far as what we can bring to the table on a world stage is that perspective and that sort of lobbying interest of having indigenous nations at the table advocating for this plant medicine. So I think that's one opportunity where the indigenous value is looming large and it's moving rather quickly. I think the other aspect of that is talking to friends in Canada, talking about building capacity for the tribes, talking about developing not just an industry, but also a workforce for economic development, for sustainable legacy benefits for these communities is critically important to the indigenous community. And that's one of the reasons we're here as well. We feel Europe is further ahead than we are right now. The U.S. is sort of sitting in a very static phase. States are all, checkerboard across the country. So we're also learning, watching, and gathering as much information as we can, and really looking for partners who can provide an objective view to what the global market looks like compared to the fodder that we're receiving in the U.S.
Thanks, Rob. And before we leave you, maybe say a couple of words about free trade zones with respect to indigenous groups and things. It's a very broad topic, but a couple of words from you would be great on that subject.
Sure. Sovereign nations have the ability to establish free trade zones for import-export with reduced duties and customs fees. These are all opportunities that tribal nations have as federally recognized nations. They also have the ability to get DEA licenses as well for just self-regulating and moving medicine at a higher level. So these are all areas and advantages that tribes have that because of lack of capacity and legal backbone and structure and fear of repercussion, they've failed to move in these directions aggressively, but they are getting more bold now as they've gotten organized and started to pool resources.
Excellent, Rob. Thanks very much for sharing that. I think it's a really important subject, and you educated me on it before the panel, and I did some extra reading. It was very, very intriguing. Questions to Patty across to yourself here. And maybe this is a good one for folks in the audience who are looking to kind of choose markets and plan their next strategic moves. What markets, in your view, Patty, hold the greatest potential for Australian cannabis companies besides their home market?
Well, since we can only export to federally legal pharmaceutical markets, we're kind of limited as to where we can go. So the things that we look for when we're exploring potential export markets is what is the regulatory pathway? And if there is some sort of beachhead or some sort of collaboration that the MCIA can spearhead on behalf of the companies for a product registration, so we look at what the regulatory pathways are, obviously the size of the country, what their framework is, and what the logistical expertise and regulatory expertise are required in order to get there. Some of the markets, we export quite a bit to Germany from Australia. We send some to the UK. And we're also, I think Poland is another market that some of the Australian companies will really look at.
Great insights, Patty. Thanks very much. And again, the importance of that, understanding the regulatory environment, the orientation of the regs, pharmaceutical or potentially not quite so heavy that direction, is so key to choosing these markets, right?
And I think one of the other markets that's going to be really interesting, and I think Paul from Little Green Pharma, a fellow Aussie who spoke earlier today, is the French market. So, they're doing their trial. I believe their trial's wrapped up. They're going to figure out what sort of framework they'll do it the French way, of course. But yeah, watching that market and seeing how for their trial, obviously they had to import product because they're not making any locally. So there's going to be an export from Australia, import into France pathway that's going to be established by that trial.
Great, Patty. Thanks very much. So let's move across to Zach for a quick question on kind of what advice that you would give to new cannabis companies looking to gain market share, global market share.
It's a broad and complex question. Thank you for that one. I would just as Patty had referenced, I think understanding the regulatory framework in each given market is really critical. It could be as much as 70% or more of the battle at the end of the day. And what we've seen in Canada, there was certainly a very high level of exuberance as we went into a rec, legal or adult use marketplace just over 5 years ago. It drew in entrepreneurs of all ilks, some with long-standing business and professional backgrounds, some who were willing to risk everything that they had saved to get into that market. While many would regard this plant as somewhat magic, this industry, these businesses do submit to the laws of gravity. Understanding the entire supply chain in the markets in which you either are operating or are looking to operate is critical. Understanding where the economics fall, where bottlenecks are, where risk really lies, I think is critical to success. And also not trying to be all things to all people. What we recognized in Canada was if the adult use market was designed in such a manner that the only point of contact effectively between the consumer and THC products was going to be at retail, that if you wanted to own the consumer relationship, having a very strong presence downstream in retail was going to be critical. And we moved aggressively in that direction.
That's great insight, Zach. Thanks very much. And again, so helpful to get insights from individuals and companies that have navigated some of these choppy waters and can bring us a bit of help as we look at emerging markets and how to decipher choosing directions, etc. Kohei, a question across to yourself. We've got a couple more questions here, then we'll go out for audience questions as well. How long do you think it will be before we see this kind of long-awaited stabilization on the regulatory front in Thailand?
Well, actually, I don't know, and I don't think some people saying that the cannabis plant will go back to be a narcotic plant, but I don't think it might not happen, and everybody hopes so. And this new regulation, when it will be installed, I really don't know. Pew, you know that? He's a Thai grower. He's one of the best growers. You know that?
Everyone's waiting for that golden nugget, guys.
He's the best genetic supplier in Thailand. Jordan, you know that?
I don't think anybody knows that.
That's great, Kohei. Thanks very much for sharing that. One final question, Rob, to yourself. I think we have a little bit of time for questions because we were nipped for about 5 minutes by our previous friends on the previous panel. With the evolving legal landscape and increasing market opportunities, what future directions do you envision for the indigenous cannabis industry, both domestically and internationally?
Well, to become friends with Zach and figure out how to, be pragmatic about what launches look like, but also figure out ways to access capital. And there's some things that are built into Indian country that just don't work. We were given gaming in the U.S. and able to regulate that through IGA, but we were also told that we can't use any of those profits towards cannabis. So there's ways to get around that, but I think it really is about problem solving. And when I talk about, capacity building and tribal governments, our tribal governments are in charge of every facet of government, and that includes business. So creating an economic development committee to create a business development committee to move towards a cannabis operation while they're making sure their housing and healthcare and legal is all taken care of. This is a lot for a tribe to manage. So trusted partners are something that we have been trying to vet since our organization's been around for 3 years, because there have been a lot of bad actors out in Indian country doing bad things for years and years and years, just around cannabis, not talking about other things. But specifically for this, we are positioned with 70% of the existing land base left in the United States. We have sovereignty, we have self-determination, we can self-regulate as an independent nation. So, in my opinion, that's a massive advantage.
Excellent, Rob, and I'm not going to argue with you. Thanks very much for that. So I think we've got a few minutes for questions. We'll hand across.
Let's hear it for the panel. Who's got a question? Anyone got a question? Oh, Bo has a question. Bo always has good questions. It's Bo Whitley, everybody. All right, here I go. I'm on my way. Oh.
Hey, this is very interesting, guys. So thanks for your contributions to this conference. In the United States and elsewhere, medical cannabis is usually viewed as a springboard into adult use. And so for those like in Australia or Japan, you've got medical now, well, limited medical in Japan. Do you think that in the future that will serve as a springboard to full adult use legalization?
Patty, Kohei, would you like to have a go at that one?
Yeah, I'll have a crack. Hi, Bo. Nice to see you again. I think when we're talking about medicinal cannabis, as we all know, there's such a wide array of indications that it can be used for, and there's also the different formats. So I think anything that's in a more pharmaceutical format, such as the soft gels or the tinctures or even the pastilles, the gummies, I don't think that will segue from medicinal into adult use. What we're currently seeing in Australia, due to a number of factors, the falling price to consumer, the ease of actually getting a prescription now because there's more doctors that are willing to prescribe. There are some patients, there are people who are using illicit product who are now switching to licit product because access is easier and the quality of the product is better. When I think of medicinal use versus recreational use, I think about the intent behind the use of the product. So I look at someone who's buying illicit product to help them go to sleep at night or help quell their anxiety. So it's not about the type of product they're taking, it's about their intention to use. So I think if we bear in mind that people use cannabis and medicinal cannabis for different purposes, I don't think in Australia we're going to have a great shift towards adult use. In my opinion, it's at least 5, possibly 10 years away.
Any other thoughts from panelists on the question?
All right. Fantastic. Let's hear it once again for our panel. Way to come in and get her done. This is the International Cannabis Business Conference in Berlin, day 2. Shout out to the Tallman Group.